Hey there, Internet. My name is Jack Packer, brotherhood of my own wolf.
My name is Darren Mooney, and I don't entirely get the references we're doing this week.
My name is KC Wosu, and Madripoor. It's like Madrid, but poor.
Ooh, fun. That reference, by the way, was just because I had the movie Brotherhood of the Wolf right on my desk.
See, you have to cue us in on this.
I see a thing and I say it. That's all I do. I see.
Isn't that movie like
them.
famously the thing that is the most like Bloodborne before Bloodborne?
Yes, it's very much like Bloodborne, though with the budget of like a high-end TV show, not necessarily a movie. It's very good, though.
Well, in that sense, I would like a retake. I am Darren Mooney, Marvel Classic Comics.
This week, we are going to talk about Falcon, Winter Soldier, Episode 3, Power Broker. So many more characters, so little movement. Ha-ha! Hello and welcome. This is A Marvelous Escape. All right, here we are, Power Broker. I don't like this. I don't like this show anymore. Wow. There wasn't really there was like an okay-ish action scene here, and once again they are adding more plot points and more characters and not moving the story forward at all.
I really like this one. I like this is like we went to Bizarro World. This is great. I had a lot of fun with this episode. I actually really enjoyed this episode. Again, just to balance out the yin and yang. Yeah. This is great podcasting, Jack. But generally speaking, again, with the caveat that I am waiting for the moment when the plot actually starts happening and when they start explaining this stuff, and it becomes much less interesting than the constituent parts that drive it. But for the moment where they're just throwing stuff on the engine like the Titanic, it's just going, go! Zemo's in there! Sharon Carter's in there! Madripoor's in there! Possibly a mutant character from Chris Claremont's Excalibur run is in there! Yeah! Just keep this thing going. I'm very much on board with this. And, there's a lot of stuff that I really like about this that, and again, that if I'm being generous and I'm waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under me, the amount of this that is a better soft reboot of the Winter Soldier and Civil War that I kind of I'm entirely on board with. It gives us two characters that were introduced, in the Winter Soldier and in Civil War. So characters like Sharon Carter and characters like Baron Zemo, and actually manages to do something marginally interesting with both of them and make them much more interesting, at least to me, watching this 45 to 53 minute episode of television, more interesting to me than they were in the feature films where they were supposed to be featured in the first place. And you also get things, so you get this idea of the characterization of Zemo, where he's kind of European aristocracy, he's Eurotrash, just drop a Eurotrash villain into anything, and Darren is immediately on board.
I can be with you there. As soon as he put on the big silly coat, I was like, this is great. Yeah.
I really dug the coat. I'm I couldn't pull that off, but he's working it.
And the bit where he's I got a convertible and I'm going dancing and you guys just play along. You guys just kind of trip in. Again, it's like that 80s action movie tropes where it's not only the Eurotrash villain, which is obligatory in those sort of movies. It's also the 48 hours. We've let this guy out of prison. We definitely should not have let this guy out of prison, but it's going to be hilarious and fun when he does it. And the fact that even while the show is doing that with Zemo, it's actually doing some decent character work with him, where it's realizing, and again, I'm waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under me. I'm waiting for the revelation, much like at the end of WandaVision, that it was Agnes all along. I'm waiting for the moment where the show goes, actually, the real villain of the piece is Zemo because he's evil and he hates superheroes. But for this episode, Zemo has killed a bunch of people. He's not a nice person by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But here, at least, he gets to make some cogent points about, how terrible superheroes are for everybody who aren't superheroes. There's a whole bunch of really clever, stuff that Darren loves, which is, the abstract, metaphorical, superhero, nonsensy stuff, where, he's wandering up to the jet plane that he owns, and he's like, oh, by the way, I was a baron in my home country, which doesn't exist anymore because of you guys. And you get this nice juxtaposition of, Zemo as old European aristocracy thing, based on bloodlines and inherited titles, contrasted with, say, Sam and Bucky, who are superheroes, which are basically top of the American class hierarchy. And again, if you've been reading Marvel comics, like the difference between Marvel and DC, sorry, this is a tangent on tangent, but the difference between Marvel and DC,
we're going to get you back,
is that like, we will in a second. Trust me, I'm going to circle back. In DC Comics, the superheroes are presented as gods. You know, like Hawkman is literally a freaking angel. Aquaman is like king of the sea. Wonder Woman is the daughter of Zeus, or, you know, this embodiment of the Amazonian from Greek mythology. Whereas in Marvel Comics, the Avengers have always been the upper class of American culture. They've been people like Tony Stark, the billionaire industrialist. Captain America, the representation of the military-industrial complex. Thor, the kind of white guy from Europe who just kind of sauntered in under his own energy and power. The scientists who invented, like, the metaphorical nuclear weapon in, say, Hank Pym and Bruce Banner and things like that. The fashion designer, Janet Van Pym, who has a shed load of money. They live on, like, Central Park Avenue. In fact, their manor was originally on Central Park. When they moved out of that, they moved into a skyscraper in Manhattan, which they have in the movie. Like, the Avengers have always been American royalty. And again, the metaphor of, like, are they closer to celebrities than superheroes? So I find that, like, juxtaposition of Zemo and his, like, old world money and his, like, I love this old classic car that I have and this inherited title and this manservant that I have while I fly around in my private jet with the more modern kind of American class structure. Something that I really, really like. I think is very interesting. And then you also get Sharon Carter, who is like, hey, by the way, you guys completely forgot that I existed after Civil War happened. None of you called me. I wasn't even like a dialogue reference in any of these movies. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I love that we're actually acknowledging that. And like,
I do feel like that point specifically, like there's a lot of things that like make sense in the broad strokes, but under any scrutiny doesn't really, because neither Bucky nor Sam were involved in Sokovia falling, right? Like neither of them were physically there.
But did they go to the memorial service, Jack? Did they go to the
They weren't there. Like
you don't have to have like caused it to go to the memorial service.
Bucky was on ice and or blipped during the time that Sharon would have been running around, as was Sam. He was on the run, and then he was a pile of dust for 5 years.
No,
but you never called me.
Counterpoint to that, there's like a whole stretch of time between Civil War and Infinity War where they could have called her. Like that's the entire point that I take from it.
I mean, that's true. I do think it's funny that while she complained to them about being left behind and being forgotten, they had a whole conversation with the scientist in that shipping crate while she fought like 20 dudes outside and was calling them for help. They still forgot about her. So I think that's going to be a running theme here, is that Sharon Carter really isn't loved by anyone.
And I love folding that into the narrative as well. Like, again, this is the thing where like what I liked about this episode was it often felt like people like the Winter Soldier and Civil War, but those are not necessarily narratives that got everything right. And it really feels like this is like, okay, give us a second pass on that. Let's actually make Sharon Carter a badass action hero. Like she gets that extended action sequence. And like, again, the editing is not great on it, but they do at several points try to do like a oneer. They do try to do extended one-take action scenes, which are like, look at our cast, look at our stunt people, look at how badass she is that she's doing all of this in shot. It's not as impressive as Daredevil, but I admire that they kind of try to do that. And like they even do, and again, this is something where I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to say I'm going to take ownership. Last week, I complained about the Winter Soldier, and I think I was entirely right, and I still am right. But anyway, I complained about the Winter Soldier and its presentation of Operation Paperclip, and in particular, the idea that it mentions Operation Paperclip, which is where the Allies took a bunch of Nazi scientists and brought them over to the US to work on things like, say, the moonshot or the space program and things like that. And like the problem with Winter Soldier is that like it takes that starting point and goes, and by the way, the worst thing about this was that Nazis then secretly took over the country. And it's like, no, you misunderstand the criticism of Operation Paperclip. The problem isn't that Nazis took over the country. The problem is that you took a bunch of Nazis and didn't make them stand trial or hold them to account. And what they do here, which is much cleverer, is you have Nagel, the scientist who worked with Hydra. And again, Hydra, the analogous Nazi sort of organization in the Marvel Universe, he was like, oh, I experimented on a bunch of people, did a bunch of whole human test subjects, all that sort of stuff. And then the CIA took my research over and they brought me in and they had me do experiments. And like, I'm like, yeah, that's how you do. That's how you do what the Winter Soldier tried to do with Hydra and the Hidden Empire and all that sort of stuff. That's the way that you do it right. You say, actually, yeah, the problem isn't that like Nagel took over the United States. The problem is the CIA said, hey, this guy seems like he's a good egg. Let's get him on board.
They said we can use this, and it's okay that you did bad things because now we can use it.
Yeah. Which I kind of admired, I thought that was a nice touch.
It's a real thing. It ties into a lot of America's kind of shady history with this kind of stuff, like just in chasing power and whatnot. And while I do agree with Jack in the sense that this episode it did feel a lot like spinning its wheels in a bunch of ways, I'm kind of on Darren's side in that I really actually liked it because it did let a lot of those character moments shine a bit more. And in one instance in particular, like I personally felt like it finally made the tension between Sam and Bucky make sense to me. And it wasn't overt how they did it, but when they again had the same argument about how the shield represents, America, idealism and whatnot, while Zemo was in there basically denouncing all the things that America has done to everybody else, it clicked in my head like, I get it now. Bucky being kind of Bucky's had a rough life, sure, but he's still kind of a privileged white man in American society. Bucky only sees what America is supposed to be, what the shield is supposed to represent. Sam, who has been a black man in America, knows that there was blood, sweat, tears, a lot of bodies basically stood on top of to get that dream and to make that shield, to make this symbol that everyone else is holding up. And so Sam, in not wanting to basically take that over, I feel like he sympathizes with that struggle and doesn't necessarily want to take on the idea that I'm representing America, because the America he knows is different than the America that Bucky sees.
And I'll actually go further than that with KC. Like, one of the things I think the show is doing, and again, this is the maybe too much credit alarm, which I don't think we've used since I talked about Zack Snyder's Justice League. Too much credit alarm. But one of the things I actually really liked about the show in general, and this episode in particular, is the recurring implication that not only is obviously Bucky a very privileged white man and therefore doesn't have the same pool of experiences as Sam Wilson and doesn't look at the shield in the same way, he's also stuck in a particular moment in a particular time. All of Bucky's pop culture references. I mean, last week we had the one, and again, the joke wasn't great about wizards with sorcerers and hats and stuff. That wasn't a great joke, but I did like the bit where he's like, I've read The Hobbit. And it's like, I read it when it first came out in 1937. And even here, where, they have the conversation about Trouble Man, and we'll probably come back to Trouble Man because it's one of my favorite moments in the episode and one of the reasons why I love Zemo so much. But they have the conversation about Trouble Man, and like Bucky's response to that is, I just prefer 40s music. It's just how I see it. And like what Casey said about him being like a privileged white guy, he's only seen one side of America. He's also like obviously had as Casey acknowledges, a very troubled, very traumatic history that we maybe shouldn't make light of. But he's also been stuck in ice, and he's also never directly experienced the trauma of getting from 1944 to the present day. Like, he never experienced or grew up after the civil rights era, for example. He never had to deal with, the chaos around welfare queens and that sort of panic going on there, the super predator nonsense of the 90s, even, again, sliding timescale, but he never had to deal with a lot of that stuff. He never even had to deal with the racism around Obama's initial election. Now, he probably was defrosted afterwards and had to deal with birtherism and stuff like that. But for him, this is all fresh.
Do you think that stuff would have reached Wakanda?
Fair point, actually. That's a very, very fair point. But he has been living in a bubble. Like, he has been living...
He's literally been living in a bubble.
Yeah, like in a stasis chamber, in a literal stasis chamber. So, like, I think that's very clever, and I think the show is doing something very clever with that.
And so like, do you think that theming even applies to, like, his dynamic versus Sharon Carter? Because, of course, like, Sharon Carter... enemy of the state, stole state goods, helped criminals, escaped, and now is banished, whereas he was the Winter Soldier, but as a white man, all of his crimes are kind of washed away. Do you think that they're going along those themes?
I kind of like rolled my eyes at that a little bit. I'm like, come on now, who's not going to forgive a blonde white girl?
Take it easy, Karen.
I'm like, come on now. But like, I get what they were going for. Like, I understood it in that moment.
I do love the idea, by the way, that, like, we acknowledge that, like, both Sam and Bucky were, like, disappeared or whatever, but I do love the idea that, like, Rhodey or, like, Black Widow never really thought to call up Sharon Carter for 5 years while this was going on. Like, while Black Widow was, like, stalking Hawkeye, like, as he was murdering his way across the globe, nobody actually said, you know what, Sharon Carter, like, and honestly,
anybody
know what she's doing?
Like, Black Widow was in charge of, like, the new organization after the blip. You think she would have specifically reached out to someone with Sharon Carter's experience? Rhodey, I'm not sure if he ran in the same circles.
No, probably not. Like, he was on the other side of the whole Civil War thing, to be fair.
Or maybe Black Widow did, but she's dead now, so it doesn't matter. Who knows? We weren't there. I do
kind of just love... But they have the whole big meeting at the start of Endgame where they're like, by the way, everything is now perfectly sorted after the flip. Like, everything is perfectly normal. There's no real chaos. And part of me is just, like, wondering, as Sharon Carter sitting there in Madripoor waiting by the phone. We finally got on top of all this blip stuff, and Sharon Carter's just like...
Well, before we get too far...
Everybody
forgets Sharon. Before we get too far away from it, let's talk about Zemo, because out of everyone, I think that Zemo's characterization did fare the best in this episode. I actually really liked Zemo in Civil War. I liked him as a villain because he had very clear goals and he was very clever about his goals. I always enjoy it when the bad guys or the good guys use their wits instead of punching their way out of a situation. And so as a villain, placing all the pieces, I enjoyed that in Civil War.
Oh, and like Magneto, he's basically right. He's doing the wrong thing, but for the right reasons, which is a great villain motivation. The only problem is Civil War never acknowledges that. Like, because Civil War so heavily weights the deck, where you, like, have him murdering civilians and dead bodies in bathtubs, and, like, shooting people while they're asleep, even though they're Winter Soldiers, because we've been conditioned to see Winter Soldiers as victims. Like, nothing that, like, you should root for Zemo because his family got killed in Age of Ultron and nobody faced any consequences for it. Tony Stark built a murder robot that, like, tore this man's city in half, killed his wife and his children, and, you know, like, nobody went to there wasn't even a fecking Senate committee hearing. Like, there was just nothing. It was just a blank check.
Right.
And, like, so you should be rooting for him. And I found, like, with Civil War, the problem was nobody in Civil War takes, say, the Sokovian Accords as, like, anything other than pure fascism. And it's like, if that's pure fascism, if pure fascism is I murder 11 people and I get to stay in a nice house under house arrest where, like, Vision will go and do my personal shopping for me, I'll probably be okay with that for a few months, you know? I don't think that's an unfair, undue restriction on my liberty.
Still fascism, but I get what you're saying. Like, I do get what you're saying, where it's like the stakes in something like Civil War were never firmly planted.
And we're never, like, focused on Zemo. Zemo was a plot mechanic. He was a way of setting characters against each other. Like, again, all of the posters where it's Cap versus Iron Man, you know, it's that sort of stuff. Like, Zemo was just there to, like, set the balls in motion or to kind of, like, set the things bouncing off each other.
I appreciate that as a villain. But you know, here as kind of this, you know, gray area, is he good, is he bad kind of thing. Like, he works and he's fun. More importantly, I feel like he's actually the only character I do care about. I still don't care about what Sam or Bucky are going through. They are not engaging me character-wise.
Yeah, like, they gave them a little bit of backstory in that first episode that I legit was excited about. And like, it's really just been in the background, to the extent that when they're in that scene where they're undercover and his sister calls him, I forgot he had a sister until that moment.
Who's Sarah? Wait a minute. Do we know Sarah?
I'm like, look at Sarah. So, like, I also...
Why would you take that call?
Like, you turn your phone off, you idiot.
Also, like, that's like rule 1. Like, you've been in the army. You turn your phone off. Come on.
I do love that he complained about the pimp costume, and he's like, yeah, but my phone is on in the pocket, so it's fine. It's like...
But the thing with Zemo is, like, if... Like, I like how he's being framed here, because if this was another show entirely, like, if this was The Boys, Zemo would be the main character.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense to root for him and what he's doing. Like, when he shoots that scientist in the head, he's justified. Like, that guy should probably be dead based on what he's been doing and, like, his demeanor because of it.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, they're really turning that guy into a likable character. But, on the other hand, yes, his methods are kind of reprehensible. He killed the king of Wakanda, mind you, to start all this stuff. And that's why I really liked, because, Bucky, who has been in Wakanda for an extended period of time, you would think he would have maybe more of a connection. But, again, he's that 1940s guy. He, like, it's like he kind of uses all these things to kind of further his own agenda, and he doesn't really consider the feelings of other people. So, which is why I was actually super excited to see Ayo show up at the end of that episode to basically make sure that stays to the forefront.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's further solidified like this idea that the underlying theme of this show is about that racial issue. The thing that I was hoping that they would touch on, they are touching on it. And like I said, the only other Marvel property that kind of mentions it like fully in the open was the Black Panther movie. And to kind of solidify that, you have a Black Panther character now showing up on the cast. So I do hope she stays for the rest of the season and she's not kind of a afterthought like maybe Sharon Carter is.
Because they just left Sharon Carter behind again.
Now.
I fear that both are going to be Cartered. Absolutely. Both are going to be Cartered away.
I see what you
really
did there.
Right. I think like I mean, yes, it's like it's always nice to see a character we know show up. That's a very comic book thing. Like, oh, little mini crossover events. Those are always fun. But I also like my first reaction in seeing her was shit, another character to get in the way. Like we have too many characters and not enough movement as far as my personal tastes are concerned. I feel like we left off at the end of last episode looking for the Flag Smashers. And so we're going to go to Zemo because Zemo will help us find the Flag Smashers. And in this
also because
episode,
Daniel Brühl is a credited lead on this show.
And you know what? He's great, and I'm happy to have him here. But so then this episode, we went to point A, talked to a dude. They sent us to point B. We talked to a dude. They sent us to point C. And then we talked to a dude. And now at the end of this episode, we're looking for the Flag Smashers again. There has been the only new piece of information we got was that the Flag Smashers had at one point 20 vials of the super soldier serum. But that doesn't matter because we were already looking for the Flag Smashers. Now we're looking for them for a slightly different reason. So, like, yes, we got a Sharon Carter action scene. Now we got Zemo. Now we have what was her character name from Black Panther?
Io.
Io. Now we have Io. This is great. Just more people to get in the way. It's more people to get in the way of the freaking movement.
What I will say, like to the show's credit, something I actually really enjoyed about this episode, what made this episode click for me, is that it really felt like if you've ever picked up like a comic book miniseries outside of like regular continuity, outside of regular events. So things like, say, like while Brubaker was writing Bucky in the Captain America book, he'd published like Steve Rogers Super Soldier. Mm-hmm. And like, again, a lot of this comes from Steve Rogers Super Soldier, where it's like, oh, we're going to Madripoor and there's like super soldier serum there and there's a black market and all that sort of stuff. But like it really, to me, kind of felt like that. It's like, oh, we're going to Madripoor this week. That's where we're dropping in on the kind of like Marvel Universe Atlas. And by the way, for the fans watching at home, this is where the X-Men continuity comes in, because Madripoor was famously created by Chris Claremont in an issue of New Mutants, and the character of Selby, who they meet there, was created by Chris Claremont in an episode of, in an issue of Excalibur as well, and in Marvel continuity is a mutant. And I kind of like, again, so much of WandaVision was like, are they going to introduce mutants? Are they going to introduce mutants? Part of me kind of loves that they're like, no, but we're going to remind you that we now have the rights to do it if we should want to. So now we can have Madripoor. Now we can have like Selby.
And the Flag Smashers were visiting the sick people in Latveria. And isn't that?
And it's like, yep,
that's
Fantastic
Dr.
Four.
Doom's
home.
Yeah.
Wait, no. Yeah. Was it Latveria or was it Latvia?
One of those exists, one of those doesn't.
Latvia.
I think it was Latvia, which is a real country, right?
Oh shit, is it? Damn it!
Yeah.
I think it is.
Part of me kind
Marvel
of wants,
has infected my Atlas brain.
Part of me kind of wants the reveal to be that, like, Sokovia, you know, when, like, Zemo was talking about how, like, all of Sokovia's neighbors moved in to reclaim it before the dust had even settled, which is like, by the way, now Sokovia doesn't exist in the MCU. Continuity is fine. We can now show atlases of Europe and they'll look like regular atlases.
There we go.
Part of me just wants, like, Latveria, Doctor Doom to have, like, moved in and been like, yeah, now this is my fictional kingdom. Because there's only so much
to do that. Because that's such a good way to do it, they're probably not going to do that.
No, Latveria was there all along.
Yep.
I get like my issue with the episode is, and this is going to get me a little bit of hate because I am an Age of Ultron apologist. I
am too.
I actually enjoy the Age of Ultron, and I think you can complain about Ultron as a villain all you want, and obviously there's flaws. but at least as a villain, the robot had clear goals and we knew what they were doing all the time. And my issue with Winter Soldier Falcon is that our heroes and villains are so nebulous. I don't understand the stakes. I don't understand our heroes' goals. I don't understand our villains' goals because we don't even know who the real villain is yet.
On that note, by the way, it's worth briefly mentioning the John Walker stuff, because we haven't talked about U.S. Agent or the new Captain America in this episode yet. They're barely in the episode. But 2 things to note. First of all, like, last week we spent a lot of time joking about how Jack was entirely wrong about the idea that, oh, he's going to go off the rails and go do something that he shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And then, like, last week it was like, you know what the difference is between me and you, Captain America? You have to play by the rules and I don't, and that makes me a hero. I like that this week it's like, oh, by the way, Captain America's not playing by the rules anymore, and that means he's not a hero, possibly. Unlike the other 2 characters that we're following who aren't playing by the rules. They're still heroes, just so we're clear. Right. And the second thing that I noticed that again, this is one of those crazy, I'm probably wrong, but I'm putting a little pin in it so we can come back to it later. The moment at the start when he does the little break-in in Germany, and he does the kind of like, he gets spit on in his face and he goes outside, you get that camera effect that you normally get to indicate mind control or distorted senses. The camera pushing in on the face, out of focus.
Fuzzy background.
Yeah, out of focus, in, out of focus, and then the soundtrack kind of drops a little bit and stuff like that. And it's all very much, again, it's very similar, arguably, I think, to how, say, Civil War or The Winter Soldier presented Bucky's brainwashing or brain conditioning as well.
Sure.
And also keep in mind the fact that, and again, this is Darren getting really fanciful, reaching for ideas that are probably not going to turn out to be true for reasons we've discussed on this podcast ad nauseum. But the fact that Nagel mentioned he'd done some work with the CIA before the blip, and then he disappeared. And then he came back, and the project mysteriously vanished. And it turned out somebody was willing to pay him money for it. Part of me wonders if it will turn out that either, like, the best case scenario for this is discovering that, like, John Walker was created by the CIA, that they used Nagel's research and they turned him into a super soldier for the CIA.
Without his own knowledge?
Without his own knowledge, possibly, even as well. Mm-hmm. My suspicion is, though, what we're going to find out is that actually he maybe went to the power broker, or the power broker got to him or some way during the blip or after the blip. But, like, I do suspect that's still where we're heading. And incidentally, by the way, I will note, in terms of, like, again, hedging and Darren being nervous about the direction of this, like, the fight sequence with Zemo, and again, love Zemo so much, love a good Euro trash villain. Like, again, give me Mads Mikkelsen, Kaecilius, and Doctor Strange. Yeah. Give me Cillian Murphy and, like, Liam Neeson in Batman Begins. Like, give me these dudes who just, like, enjoy being evil because, like, it like fills some need in their soul, and they just want to look good while being evil. Give me those evil guys all the time. But, like, in the fight sequence at the docks, the moment where, like, and I love that, like, again, Zemo kind of puts on the mask, which is a little bit hypocritical for a dude who hates superheroes, and he blows up the kind of, like, pipe vent, and then he jumps down and he does a bunch of kung fu stuff. And I am absolutely, I'm not body shaming. B, Daniel Bruhl is a handsome man. Even as a straight man, he's a very handsome man. But, like, Zemo doesn't really look like he's in the right physical shape to be messing up people the way that he does in that action sequence, where he just, like, grabs them and flips them and throws them and kicks them.
Remember, he's been locked up for a couple years at this point. Like, what else is there to do other than, work out?
And also remember, he was able, like they very clearly set up, like by standard action rule logic, all you really need to do in an action sequence or before an action sequence is set up that the person doing the action has some sort of expertise. And they went to great pains to set up Zemo going, hey, I hunted all of these Hydra agents for years. I had to work my way through the ranks. So it's like, all right, that's the dumb setup. Like, yeah, Kung Fu, fine.
Kung Fu. I like that I didn't just shoot them at a distance or blow them up in cars. I probably wrestled them like a real man.
You probably did. Well, it is, like, it's a little disheartening because Zemo as a villain, I do like Zemo as a villain, as, like, one Zemo. Who doesn't
a thinker.
Yes, he is.
Well, he reads Machiavelli, and again, like that's like the whole thing where I'm worried that it's going to turn out to have been Zemo all along.
Yeah, I mean,
because he's
it's going
introduced
to,
playing chess. He's listening to Requiem in D minor because, of course, he is, and he's reading Machiavelli. And again, like I don't mind this. This is standard 80s action movie tropes. These are 80s action movies rules. Like, how did Bucky get the key card into his copy of Machiavelli's The Prince? I don't understand that, but again, he's reading Machiavelli's The Prince, and it's like, by the way, we want you to know that this villain is perhaps even Machiavellian.
What?
Eh? Yeah.
I have a theory for
go for it.
The breakout, because I thought it was odd that he asked him what he was reading. So clearly he must have, like, before he ever even got the meeting scheduled, he must have known he wanted to get him out. Like, in order for him to be of any help, it wasn't just going to be a conversation. He would have needed to get him out. So him being, a superhero, he can slip a key card in a book that gets delivered on the day. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like, he can do what he needs to do to, like, set things up so that he can break himself out, which was a story he told Sam, which I thought was actually pretty funny. I
love that I did it 35 minutes ago.
Like, I didn't do anything, but hypothetically, I broke Zemo out of prison.
Right.
But, and again, that's classic 80s action movie rules, because one of them has to be the hotshot and one of them has to be the cool, grounded dude. And I kind of I love that, like, oh, by the way, I didn't tell you because you'd be mad, but I kind of broke a supervillain out of prison.
Yeah, but they constantly swap who's the hotshot and who's the, they swap who's the straight man and who's the goofy one, to the point where none of their characterization even matters.
That's
what Zemo's the
they did seem to
one.
pull down on Sam's like goofiness. Like, he was really talkative in episode 2 to the point to where he was making jokes.
Cyborg brain.
He was he was freaking rapid firing them. Like, no one was reacting, nothing was happening. He would just make like 3-4 jokes in a row to no audience. So I'm glad he sort of has calmed down, because I was able to tolerate them a lot more.
But that's because Zemo falls into that role. Yes, I watched the dynamic, and I'm like, I understand, like, now. Because obviously Bucky is very serious because he's murdered a bunch of people and he's suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. So he can't be entirely kind of flippant, lighthearted. And Sam, is, like, a little more flippant, but is also, like, dealing with the weight of systemic oppression in American society. So he can't exactly be Mr. Joke a minute. So, like, I get why you introduce Zemo, because, again, one of the luxuries of having a European villain is, like, he can drive up in a fecking Bentley and just say, hop in. Like, the moment where he gives his opinion of Troubled Man is, like, my favorite moment of the episode, because Brule delivers it like a supervillain monologue. It's comprehensive. It's complete. It's a study of the African American experience. As if he's saying, by the way, I listened to it 35 minutes ago, Mr. Bond. It's
like he's shaming Bucky for his lack of knowledge.
Yes. Because he's not only a supervillain, he's also an art critic, because that's so 80s Euro trash villain. Yeah. And no, we love all of that. Again, my problems is just like like Baron Zemo's plot armor is showing a lot. Under any other logical circumstances, they would have either taken him back to jail or killed him, because they're just okay with killing people now, which is very fine. Like, very fine. You want to kill people, that's fine.
80s action movie rules. Yeah.
And there's always that suspension of disbelief with people who are main characters. They have plot armor. They're going to survive. Those are the rules. But it's when the plot armor starts to flaunt itself that you start rolling your eyes a little bit.
Like, my big, like, potential, like, red flag alarm thing going off in my head is that, like, what's going to happen is they broke Baron Zemo out of prison. Zemo is going to turn out to be a big villain in whatever happens over the course of this. Lots of people are going to die as a result, and everyone's going to be like, man, Zemo, what a terrible villain he was. And nobody, not even fucking Falcon, is going to turn to Bucky and go, you know what, you maybe made a bad call. Like, I'm not going to judge you, Bucky, but, like, this is partially on you.
Well, knowing
they'll
the way
like
Marvel
no Falcon's going to turn to him and go, they don't know what you sacrificed for them, Bucky.
No, they're going to do something even worse than that, which is that Bucky was somehow manipulated by Zemo, even though it wasn't the normal hypnosis. It was like new Zemo hypnosis and some other bullshit where it's like,
I like it.
It was, it's going to be some other bullshit, but I don't know. I would love the story to start moving forward at some point.
Well, we're halfway there, Jack.
Yeah, this is the halfway point. So they have no choice but to try and wrap things up.
We're halfway there and haven't moved since episode 1, because I want to say at episode 1 they were trying to get to the Flag Smashers.
Like I do like it's
they were
fun.
learning about them, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I will forgive a lot if it's fun and it's clever and it's doing interesting things. And for the moment, it's doing those things. Like, again, like WandaVision, my big fear is that once we begin putting all those pieces into the places they need to be in order for the, like, story to reach its climax, it's going to be the path of least resistance and the least interesting aspect of it. And, like, for now, I'm like, I will accept interesting nonsense over non-interesting plot mechanics, you know?
It really didn't bug me that much.
Sorry,
but they
Jack.
do have like maybe one more episode. Like this is the last episode where they can get away with this. Like the next one, I'm jumping into Jack's side.
Yeah. You know, like there's only so much stuff you need to set up before we can start exploring those ideas, exploring those characters. And we've done a ton of setup and not a lot of exploring. And I feel like a little bit like they're tricking us, because we've gone to a lot of new locations with our characters.
Yeah.
And that's usually like a what do you call it? Shorthand for moving the story forward, but the story hasn't moved at all. We just keep going to new locations to trick us into thinking.
Well, if the characters are moving, like the characters are literally moving, the plot doesn't have to. That sort of illusion.
Exactly, and so I feel a little bit of trickery, and I just stop. Yes, we understand. Stop adding to the who, what, and the where. We have enough who, what, and where. It's time to get to the where. You know what I'm saying?
No, I mean, I'm really looking forward to next week, where Sam and Bucky take part in a public magic show for the local community. I'm just really looking forward to that episode.
I mean, now that they've introduced a character from the Black Panther series, I think that was the last part of what this show's arc was supposed to be.
Yes.
Because to me, now it seems clear that all along it was gonna be a story about like America dealing with its past demons. And like, for whatever reason, the Marvel universe doesn't feel comfortable doing that without Wakanda.
Well,
So-
you know, like Wakanda is like metaphorically and quite literally like the great black representation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So like, I think they just couldn't not have Wakanda part of it. And you can't have the white guy as your only representation of Wakanda.
The White Wolf, thank you very much. To be fair and to give credit where it's due, there was a really, really good interview on The Ringer this week where they talked about like how it was actually made and how the pitch kind of came together. And the showrunner, Malcolm Spellman, actually like made the point that like when he began working on this, like Chadwick Boseman was the big like African like black superhero, basically. Like Black Panther was a moment for representation and realization in media. And like now with the passing of Boseman, and obviously understanding that like Ryan Coogler is still going to make Black Panther 2, and there's obviously going to be another Black Panther, whichever character from Black Panther that's going to be. But like for the moment, with that like in stasis or in transit or kind of like just in situ, like Spellman pointed out that he didn't realize when he took the job that like Falcon would basically, as KC said, take on the mantle of having to deal with this within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so I actually really do admire the idea of bringing in Wakanda in that sense, in that like I think if you're talking about the idea of a black Captain America, you're talking about the idea of a black superhero. And I know, and again, like this is something the comments are going to get very excited about. Yes, I know that Steel was a thing in the 90s. Yes, I know that Blank Man was a movie. Yes, I know that Blade kickstarted this whole... Yeah, well, I mean, that's a separate... Like, what are we going to do when this is over in the gap between this and Loki? We're going to talk about Blank Man. We're not going to talk about Blank Man. But what I will say... though, is that, like, you know, obviously those are important parts of superhero cinematic history, but for the big superhero boom that really kicked off 2002, 2003, it was Black Panther that really did it. And now Chadwick Boseman is gone. And, like, I like that in interviews, Spellman is not being ambiguous. He's not hedging. He's like, and again, he's literally said, like, if you think the end of this show, and this is something that actually gives me hope, that actually makes me smile and goes, yeah, I kind of really like this. Because, like, if you think at the end of this that Sam is going to pick up the shield and go, by the way, thank goodness America solved racism, then you're not reading the room. But I kind of like that the show is like, okay, well, we have to, part of the legacy of this being a Disney Plus TV show set in the MCU with now the default like black superhero lead, we have to acknowledge Wakanda. We have to bring it in. And by the way, I did like, and again, I know we've talked a lot about how the show spins its wheels. Some good mechanics in terms of writing. I did like that they specifically mentioned Sharon Carter last episode and put her in the previously, so that you know she's going to turn up this week. And I specifically like that when they talk about breaking Zemo out of prison, you have like the moment where Sam says, "Do you think Wakanda's forgotten that he murdered King Chikaka?" King Chikaka, and it's like, by the way, no, I think rhetorical question, they haven't, and then they pay that off at the end of the episode, which is like very good dramatic setup and payoff to give the show credit. I'm being very generous to this show this week.
You're being very generous to this show, and I guess like that's fine because that's like you said, we can contrast, and maybe by the end everything will make sense, and all the wheel spinning will result in a beautiful peel out.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for the rest.
You mean it'll take flight? Because it's Falcon?
Oh, that's better. That's better.
I'm really disappointed, by the way, that like nobody's called the Winter Soldier the Snowman because he's on ice so much, because you could have a nice callback to the classic 80s kind of espionage thriller of the Falcon and the Snowman. That's like on my list of like, that's a 5-star TV show. If you can make that.
I probably would have lost a star for me.
Yeah. Take it down a notch. Well, we're going to call it there before Darren has any other bad ideas. Thank you, everybody, for watching and or listening to this. Once again, I've been Jack Packard.
I've been Darren Mooney.
I've been KC Wosu.
And we'll see you next week for more Falcon and Winter Soldier talk.